Hey there, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Allison Wilson. I'm Director of Communications at the Institute for Sustainable Communities. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. This event is being recorded and that recording will be shared with all registered participants as soon as it's available. The chat function is on, and if you have any technical issues or questions during today's event, please use the chat to send them through, and a member from the Institute will contact you. After the panel session with our speakers, we'll be holding an audience Q&A session. So you can also use the chat to submit your questions for our panelists anytime during today's event using that Q&A function. And now to introduce our panelists is Institute for Sustainable Communities President, Dion Ferris.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome, everyone. This is our very first event at the Institute for Sustainable Communities in our Climate Equity in Action series. In the months ahead, we'll bring you insightful conversations with climate change and equity leaders from around the world. Today, we're thrilled to bring you Women of Color Leading the Energy Justice Transition, featuring a panel of 3 outstanding women of color who are champions in the fields of environment, climate, and sustainability. We will hear from them about the ways the federal government is operationalizing racial equity and environmental justice. I'm pleased to share that the administration's commitment to equitable climate change interventions and just transition for workers and communities aligns with the Institute for Sustainable Communities' commitment to community-led and locally led green, low-emission economic solutions. I'm pleased as well to be leading this important discussion today. And now I'd like to introduce our august panelists. Brenda Mallory is the 12th chair of the Council on Environmental Quality at the White House and the first African American to serve in this position. As chair, she's the presidential advisor on environmental and natural resources policies that improve, preserve, and protect public health and the environment for America's communities. Chair Mallory has decades of experience in both the public and the private sector, including nearly 20 years at the Environmental Protection Agency and the Council on Environmental Quality. Also, she helped shape many of President Obama's signature environmental and natural resources policy successes. Shalonda Baker serves as Secretarial Advisor on Equity and Deputy Director for the U.S. Department of Energy Pardon me, we had a little glitch there with my internet. Let me begin again to introduce Shalonda Baker. Shalonda Baker serves as the Secretarial Advisor on Equity and as Deputy Director for Energy Justice in the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity at the United States Department of Energy. Prior to her appointment at the department, she was a professor of law, public policy, and urban affairs at Northeastern University. She spent over a decade conducting fundamental research on the equity dimensions of the global transition away from fossil fuel energy to cleaner energy resources. Adriana Quintero is Energy Foundation's first Senior Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. At the foundation, she designs and leads the organization's efforts focused on culture, policies, and programmatic work that embody and reflect a commitment to equity and inclusion. Adriana is a frequent presenter on the importance of power and increased leadership of Black and Brown people, and the need for intentional and equitable partnership and collaboration. Adriana is a leader in centering equity and justice in the fight for a clean energy future. I apologize, we're having some technical issues on my end. My apologies again. All right, with those introductions, let's get started. My first question is for Chair Mallory. Madam Chair, the agency you lead, the Council on Environmental Quality, coordinates the federal government's efforts to improve, preserve, and protect America's public health and the environment. Share with us, please, how will the Council on Environmental Quality facilitate the prioritization and inclusion of people and tribes hardest hit by climate change and pollution?
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, Deanna, it's such a pleasure to be here and to be with these ladies. Looking forward to the conversation, but more importantly, looking forward to the work that we're going to do together over the next few years. The short answer to the question is meaningful engagement. But let me just unpack that a little bit further. The starting point is that our work at CEQ is grounded in a belief I share with President Biden that every single person has a fundamental right to drink clean water, to breathe clean air, and to live in a healthy community. At CEQ, we are committed to addressing our nation's legacy of injustice and exclusion. And we are committed to charting a new and better course that puts the voices, lived experiences, and expertise of historically disadvantaged and underserved communities at the heart of federal policy decisions. As a chair of the White House Environmental Justice Interagency Council, I am working with every single agency to prioritize stakeholder engagement as a fundamental component of agency decision-making. This means regular, meaningful, and robust consultation with those hit hardest by climate change and environmental pollution, including members of federally recognized tribal nations. The Justice 40 interim implementation guidance, a key step in achieving President's ambitious goal to deliver at least 40% of the overall benefits from federal investments in climate and energy and clean energy to disadvantaged communities, is just one example of that work. And the guidance includes a requirement for agencies to consult with stakeholders, including tribal governments, as well as Native communities, to ensure public participation and that community stakeholders are meaningfully involved in what constitutes the benefits of the program. The White House Environmental Justice Interagency Council is also actively working with the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council and the environmental justice leaders across the country to support the development of this whole of government approach and strategy to environmental justice. So CEQ is working to ensure that those disproportionately harmed by exposure to environmental pollutants, unsustainable energy systems, underinvestment in infrastructure and services, and the impacts of climate change receive the benefits of our transition to a clean economy. So I'll stop there.
Well, what you share with us is a remarkable glide path in terms of achieving success for communities that are the hardest hit by climate change and pollution emissions. While they are hardest hit, I think it's also important to mention that communities are also building and strengthening their power in the face of challenges in terms of the access to those resources that you so excellently point out, Chair Mallory. The 40% commitment under the Justice 40 initiative is a big one. It's a groundbreaker, and all of us are really thrilled to see this kind of commitment from the administration. Further, the administration's budget outlines clean energy investments that would mitigate disproportionate environmental impacts in communities of color. And with that context that you shared, Chair Mallory, and the context of Justice 40 and the administration's budget, my next question is for Ms. Baker. So Shalonda, will you please share with us how the Department of Energy will support prioritizing community inclusion, and building tribal and community capacity and technical acumen.
Absolutely. I'm just smiling from ear to ear. I have to say that my heart is so full right now. I mean, it's really amazing to be on this panel. And Dion, I'm on your shoulders in so many ways. I mean, you're such a trailblazer in this work, and I just want to thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. It's also just fantastic to see Chair Mallory. Her leadership in the White House has been fantastic, and I'm so thrilled to be working with her. And Adriana, it's just good to see you again as well. I also see some familiar faces coming through the chat. So lots of folks who are in the community, and it's just great to see your voices or read your introductions in the chat. So let me just take a step back. I want to highlight three things. One, just underscore the historic commitment that the president has made to frontline communities, to environmental justice communities, and to communities transitioning away from fossil fuels. I mean, this is absolutely historic. And Dion, you're sort of saying it in an understated way, but we've never seen this before. And we have a phenomenal opportunity to create real change and transform places on the ground. The second thing I want to highlight is that a lot of this change has to come from the inside out. And so you mentioned that I'm the Secretary's advisor on equity. And what that has meant is that I have kind of an eagle-eye view of everything going on across the agency with respect to equity. The president issued on day one what we have come to call the Equity Executive Order, the Equity EO, and that's E01S01. And that calls on every single federal agency to conduct a comprehensive equity assessment across its programs, policies, procurement efforts, et cetera. And so I was really honored to lead that effort across DOE to really understand where communities face barriers to accessing resources, and stakeholder engagement, comes up again and again. How are we reaching stakeholders, and are we meaningfully engaging them throughout the process of funding opportunities and implementation of pilot projects, et cetera? So at DOE, our secretary has said that equity is her North Star. And so what that means is that, when we deliver a report to her and put it on her desk and say, these are the challenges that we face, she's committed to making sure that we eradicate those barriers and eliminate those challenges. And so I'm excited to be in partnership with the secretary and to really follow her lead as we move into a more equitable future for the organization from the inside out, because that's key. And so the third thing I want to share is kind of tying back to the Justice 40 initiative. So again, Chair Mallory described the Justice 40 initiative, and for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's the president's commitment to move 40%, at least 40% of the benefits of climate and clean energy investments to frontline communities, to disadvantaged communities. And DOE has equities all within the Justice 40 initiative. And so we are right now, we have a community of practice that has been stood up to ensure that we deliver on the president's promise. But I'm excited to announce that today, the department just launched the Communities LEAP pilot program. And so that is Local Energy Action Program, where we are providing funding for 36 communities, at least 36 communities across this country, to do technical assistance, to provide technical assistance. And that will be a bottom-up effort, community-led. And as the secretary said, I just came off of a panel with her. This is just the start. It's a down payment on the president's historic commitment. So I'm a kid in a candy store. I mean, this is a dream come true for me, that I get to do this work every day, and that I actually get to stand up and say, I'm working on behalf of equity and justice. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. I'm excited to continue the dialogue.
Well, thank you for sharing that wonderful news. And we are encouraged by your enthusiasm, and our shoulder is at the wheel with you. So know that for sure. Let me ask Adriana a question. Adriana, through your work on the energy transition team and your work with the Energy Foundation, can you please share with us your thoughts on prioritizing beneficial climate change outcomes for communities and tribes? For example, in the rollout of Justice 40 under Executive Order 14008, or the executive order that Shalonda just mentioned, or perhaps under the Biden infrastructure framework? Your choice, please share.
Well, I think that I really love, first of all, this is an amazing honor to be here, and I'm extremely grateful. And I love how you framed that question. And the fact that Brenda and Shalonda teed up this part of the conversation so beautifully, because the frameworks that are being put forth by the Biden administration are truly groundbreaking and historic. And unless philanthropy plays our role, we come in and we actually play our role to make sure that the power and the systems and the resources exist in our communities to make sure that these get rolled out and actually deliver the results that were envisioned by all of these amazing policies, we are not going to achieve the outcomes that we need. And ultimately, environmental justice, energy justice is about delivering equitable outcomes for those who need it the most. So the way that I see this whole picture coming together is that our role as advocates or as philanthropists is to not only work alongside in partnership with the Biden administration to move this forward, but to also hold the government and all of the players accountable. And the only way that we can do that is by making sure that the funds are flowing to the organizations who are closest to the work. As much as we'd like to think that when we sit in a foundation, we're close to the work, the truth is that we are not living in the communities that are most impacted. We are not we haven't had the same experiences throughout, and therefore are not really as well prepared to craft the outcomes and the solutions that are required. So it's about putting all of these pieces together in order to really deliver those outcomes. And it starts with breaking a lot of the false paradigms and narratives that I think have taken hold for far too long in the environmental movement and within philanthropy, that the power doesn't exist, that the experience doesn't exist. And that's simply false. And what I'm really heartened by is by seeing that philanthropy is finally coming to the table, recognizing, maybe we don't know it all. And maybe we do actually need to put the resources and power where they truly belong, which is in the hands of communities, so that these ambitious goals can actually materialize.
Thank you very much for keeping us directional about the way resources should flow, and also helping us understand better how important the role of philanthropy is and the changes that philanthropy is undergoing now to be more directional in terms of how the resources flow. Really appreciate that perspective. So let's shift gears just for a moment and say, as we all know, Justice 40 and the executive orders are major determinants of how equity will operationalize from the Biden-Harris administration. I also want to point out that the National Environmental Policy Act is a pretty important determinant as well of how initiatives from the infrastructure bill and other climate initiatives will be implemented. So my question is for you, Chair Mallory. What can advocates anticipate from strengthening the National Environmental Policy Act and its rules and overarching climate change requirements?
Thanks so much for that, Dion. And first of all, let me just say, the Biden-Harris administration is deeply committed to environmental protection, environmental justice, and climate action. And all of those things are linked under NEPA, and they're linked through the work that CEQ does. And I think we believe that each one of these is fundamental to economic and social well-being. And so the working together of those elements, I think, is crucially important for the success of the work that we're trying to do. A key component of this effort is ensuring that environmental reviews conducted pursuant to NEPA fully and fairly evaluate all reasonably foreseeable effects. including in particular environmental justice and climate change effects. And this is important all the time, but especially now on the precipice of what we hope is a historic investment in infrastructure. A thorough, efficient, and inclusive NEPA process will ensure that infrastructure gets built in the right manner from the start, and so that we don't have the adverse impacts on communities and the difficulties that come from trying to correct things that were not done in an appropriate way to start. Those are crucial elements. CEQ is working right now to propose revisions to the National Environmental Policy Act regulations that were significantly changed really for the first time during the prior administration. And we have concerns and have been very public about the concerns that we have, that some of the changes that were made to the longstanding regulations depart from NEPA's purposes, including its purpose of ensuring science and reason-based decision-making. So CEQ is committed to a NEPA process that involves affected communities and the public in the process. And that process, we're also in the process of making updates to the greenhouse gas emissions guidance that was done to help inform and advise agencies, stakeholders, and communities on best practices. So those efforts are underway, and I think will be important in ensuring that both the work that we're doing in justice and the work that we're doing towards climate change are done in a way that will advance the overall agenda.
Well, as an organization, we want to do everything to support your success. Now let me ask a question of Ms. Baker. Shalonda, shifting to energy justice and access to safe, affordable, and sustainable energy, what can you share with us? What do you anticipate from current Department of Energy climate change strategies and policies?
I love the question. Thank you so much. I'm going to put my law professor hat on for a minute and just give a high-level overview of what energy justice is, because I think it's a new term and it's often conflated with environmental justice, which is often confused with climate justice. I mean, these are all related terms that really highlight the unique vulnerabilities that places experience. On the energy justice side, I mean, it's really building on the legacy of environmental justice and building on climate justice narratives. It's about procedural justice, which is to say people have a meaningful seat at the table. We at DOE are committed to that. So there will be engagement throughout. We've already held, and this is to echo Chair Mallory's comments, I mean, we've already held some stakeholder meetings. We intend to do more. I mean, we're sort of lockstep with members of the community, with all types of stakeholders across the philanthropic community and private sector, but engagement is key, and this is really essential to energy justice. The second component is distributive justice, which is to say that we want to ensure that the work that we do and the dollars that go out our door do not create more harm, right? And that they're actually, distributing the benefits and burdens of development equitably. And this echoes some of the work of the environmental justice movement, which is really concerned with the disproportionate burdens that communities of color experienced through development. So with energy justice, we want to ensure that the energy development that happens actually is equitable. And so we have a mechanism for that, and that is Justice 40, right? So we are developing a framework to measure the benefits of that development, and we're working closely with all of our programs across the DOE family. We've got 14,000 people in our complex, 100,000 employees, and so we've set up a system to ensure that everyone is on board, everyone is on the same page with Justice 40, and that we have a uniform system of measuring the benefits from that, and that's distributive justice. The third component of energy justice is recognition justice. And so this is to say that we are recognizing communities where they are. And our community, our secretary is committed to place-based work. And so this is different, right? I mean, you can model out a scenario, you can use data sets to understand what's happening, at a broad level, but you don't know what's happening on the ground until you talk to people, until you talk to communities. And this, again, circles back to the need for procedural justice and participation in the overall development process. And the last part of energy justice is restorative justice. And so that's really about the healing that comes from development. And I've always said that, you know, we can heal through the energy system. The energy system can create economic opportunities that have been unparalleled. And again, we have a president who's really committed to that, and our secretary is right behind him, making sure that the work that we do moves the needle and transforms communities. So that's what you can see and expect from the Department of Energy. And they've created a new role. My position never existed before January 20th. It's the Deputy Director for Energy Justice. So my work is very much committed to ensuring that we have that structure, that envelope to deliver on the president's commitments.
Well, thank you very much for wearing that professorial hat and giving us that breakdown. Thank you very much. So let me say this. At the Institute, we work with communities of color and low-income communities across sectors and disciplines. We bring together decision makers that have the jurisdiction, the authority, and the budgets, decision makers who are influencers, investors, and as Adriana points out, funders. We prioritize cross-sector decision makers who can and do make a difference in terms of community environmental quality, community health and resiliency, and access to clean energy benefits. My next question is for Adriana. We've heard from the Department of Energy and the Council on Environmental Quality, our leaders there, about their inclusivity plans with communities and tribes. I'm wondering, from your experience on the Department of Energy transition team, how you see the private sector, such as the power sector, the transportation sector, and the community development sectors. How do you see these sectors, or others that you may want to point out, supporting equitable climate change solutions?
Well, it's an excellent question, because again, it goes towards that whole of the system having to work together and find that recognition. In what my experience on the transition shared with me is just the amazing opportunities and also the real challenges that exist to bringing everybody along, because this has been a framework that is not how we have done business. You know, the Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration, it really is groundbreaking. We have not focused on all of on centering justice and equity across everything until now, hence Shalonda's amazing new role. And so we are on a path towards this new way of working together and as a country, frankly, because when we start to look at the role that businesses have to play, the role that energy providers have to play, we're truly talking about changing the way that everybody does business. And we can't kid ourselves that that's going to be easy or happen overnight. There's going to be resistance. There has been resistance. However, I do think that the past 2 years, if not 4 years, but especially the past 2, have elevated racial inequity in a way that we had not seen before in this country. And especially younger generations, but even those of us who truly have known that this is a priority for far too long that's gone ignored, we are all speaking out in a way that we have not done so before. And this is happening in those same places where we need that change. So it's happening at the public utility commissions where energy decisions are being made. The conversations are being had at FERC in a way, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, where they've been centered in a new way where they have not been centered before, an Office of Public Participation there, and an incredible leadership that's been brought in. They're being had in corporate America and in boardrooms where they have not been had before. And what the beauty of it is, it's being tied to this same urgency that we're hearing around bringing and delivering on racial equity and undoing the historical just oppression that's been killing our country. is being tied to the same pain and suffering that we're seeing stemming from climate change. And you can't really separate them both. You can't have racial justice without having energy justice, because all of the pollution that we have created in the creation of energy has fallen disproportionately on our communities that have been historically oppressed. So in order to solve one, we must solve them all. And democracy is frankly even at that's in that same trifecta. We have to make sure that we continue to empower people to speak that, and to understand that it's through those conversations that we're going to bring about this change. It's by holding, if I'm working at an energy company, asking the hard questions and holding my employer accountable. If I'm working at a corporation, doing the same thing, and making those connections for those who have been frankly insulated and not had to worry about those things, and just showing the reality that in order to truly deliver on the promise that we have, and that we're the long overdue promise of racial justice, we must also be delivering climate justice and energy justice. And that's a wonderful opportunity, because while we may not all have the tools at our ready to know exactly who we need to talk to at Department of Energy or the Council for Environmental Quality tomorrow, we do all have the ability to vote, and we do all have the ability to raise these issues in our workplaces and in our communities, and with our energy providers, and with the places with which we do business. And that's how we hold, that's how we create accountability, by using our dollars and our voices to vote and demand the change that we need.
Well, thank you so much for bringing the significance of democracy to the fore, and the ways that we need to deploy democracy to move forward this very important agenda for people who are facing environmental degradation and climate change disruption. Thank you very much for bringing that home. At the Institute, we're conveners, we're expert providers of technical assistance and equity knowledge to the constituencies that we serve. Our goals are community-driven planning, embedded equity, cross-cutting collaboration, data-centered understanding, and public-private partnerships. There are a lot of folks on this call that are in mission-driven organizations, and my last question is for all of you. And that question is, beginning with Brenda, Ms. Mallory, how can mission-driven nonprofits like the Institute for Sustainable Communities support you, the work you're doing, and the administration's strategies?
Great. Well, that's a great question. And it's one where I feel like the answer is just do you. Advocate for what you believe in. We want to hear you. We want to hear your authentic voices. I think it's really important that, when we say that stakeholder engagement is really important, it's because I think we understand the importance and the value of hearing those different voices and trying to have all of that in the mix as we're thinking about like what makes the most sense in terms of a path forward. That's like hearing from local communities, it's hearing from policy experts, it's hearing from local elected officials and everyone in between, because I do feel like there is that slightly different perspective also often reveals solutions and opportunities that you may not have thought of, because that just isn't where you have been situated, and that really matters. And the other thing I say is just stay engaged, because as you've heard a theme from all of us today, this is hard work. This is not going to be solved in a few weeks, or, this is not a short term, let me throw some money at it and it's going to be over. I mean, we're talking about making a fulsome investment going forward. And I think it's really important for that kind of investment that people understand what we're taking on and just, stay with it. So I think I've been saying along my conversations over the last few months that, you don't solve big issues like we're facing alone, and the government can't do it by itself. No individual is going to be able to do it by themselves. And so we really have to work together, and we have to listen to each other, and we have to recognize the important role that each brings to the table. And so I think that's going to make all the difference in the challenges that we have before us right now, but really for anything big that you want to accomplish, that's going to be the key to success.
Thank you for those words of wisdom. Ms. Baker, how can mission-driven nonprofits support the administration's strategies?
Well, I also love that question because you're asking where I need help, and there is so much work to be done. But I will echo Chair Mallory in saying that you're already doing it, right? So by hosting this meeting, this forum, this panel, you're starting a conversation with us. And so that is key. I think creating the space for engagement and conversation has to be a part of how we can partner. Conversation doesn't always have to be virtual or in person whenever that happens, but it can also be in writing. And so we get a lot of white papers and other lists of recommendations that don't just go into the trash. I mean, we actually look at that. And so we encourage people to reach out to us, to connect in writing, to let us know, what sort of top priorities are. And, we can read that and look at it and sort of analyze it against the landscape that we face. I also just want to say that one way that mission-driven nonprofits can assist is by having grace. As Chair Mallory said, this isn't easy work and this will take a while, right? And so I think have grace, but also push us, right? So it's like two sides of one coin. So please do be patient. I mean, we're here to do transformative work, to be historic, in terms of how we want to do it. And it is going to take a while, and it's not a light lift, but we also, so we need your patience, but we also need you to keep us moving. And so I will ask for that in helping us advance the work. And lastly, I will just add that you all understand places. So it can get really easy to get kind of wrapped up in the day-to-day, but mission-driven nonprofits in particular really understand communities. And so that's why it's just so essential to keep the lines of communication open.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. Adriana, last question to you. How can mission-driven nonprofits like the Institute support these marvelous strategies and the work that's coming out of the administration?
I want to echo what both Brenda and Shalonda said, and just don't stop doing what you're doing. These types of conversations are incredibly important. We have some incredible participants who are eager to do more. And I think that energy is what's going to get us across the finish line. I've found that everything that is true. We think sometimes we minimize our power and we minimize our own voices. And I know that I say that speaking for myself as a woman and as a woman of color. And even though I've been in positions of privilege, I often minimize I underestimate the impact a phone call or a letter or an email may have. And especially if it's constructive and collaborative, I'm always still surprised, usually very pleasantly surprised, that it is welcome and it is important. And I once, and I've heard it more than once, but very recently heard a member of Congress say, and let's not forget Congress here, because what he was saying was sometimes 5, 10, 15 phone calls or notes or emails or letters make the difference. So let's not forget our power, because we have power and we need to use it, because this is a very unique moment in time. Let's not let it pass. Let's get out there and use our power for good.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Ms. Mallory, Ms. Baker, and Ms. Quintero for this robust discussion. Your insights are invaluable, and they will continue to guide us in supporting the Biden-Harris administration's work and strategies. So now we're eager to hear from our participants. This concludes the panelist presentation portion of today's webinar. And I'd like to turn it over to the Institute's Communications Director, Allison Wilson, for our participants to weigh in with questions. Yes, Allison, I do know your name.
Oh, my
Turning it over
goodness.
to Allison Wilson.
Thank you guys for such an amazing discussion, just full of great information and insights. And I could tell looking at the chat that you really inspired a lot of thoughts. And in fact, we have so many questions. I don't think we'll have time today to answer all of them. However, we are collecting questions and will provide answers that we'll publish on our website and email to people who are registered. So the first question today is from a viewer in Washington, D.C. for Chair Mallory. We've heard a lot about President Biden's whole of government approach to environmental justice. Can you describe in more detail what that means?
Yes, thanks, and I appreciate the question. Basically, you will hear us using that term for many things. And what it means at bottom is that everybody's got a role. Everybody's involved. It gets back to the point that we were talking about earlier, just in various sectors, which is that, we're doing something really hard here. And we know that it's important to make sure that everyone who can contribute is called on to contribute. And so, one of the ways in which the whole of government approach is working on environmental justice specifically is the creation of the Environmental Justice Interagency Working Group, which is designed to kind of serve as like the forum for bringing in all of those voices from across the government. But even apart from that, the notion is, there are agencies who've been doing environmental justice throughout their history. And there are others who've just not been engaged in the areas of thinking about environmental justice. And all of them are being called on to look at their missions, look at their programs, and figure out, how can I make a difference for communities on the ground through my programs? So that's basically what we mean when we say all of government. We all have a role.
Thank you. The next question from Lynn Godfrey. And it looks like this is directed to anyone who has an answer for it. But what would you suggest as a first step in developing a place-based energy justice program in high energy burden, high poverty communities? Anyone want to take that one?
That seems like maybe it's targeting me. I don't know. It's not Department of Energy. So I'll take a stab. I do want to reiterate the importance of the community's LEAP pilot that we just launched today. And if I can find it and drop it in the chat, I will, because it's all about technical assistance and really providing a space for communities to come together to do that community energy planning. And it's focusing on communities with energy burden, communities with environmental justice concerns, and communities that are transitioning away from fossil fuels. And so it's squarely in the wheelhouse of the perspective of that question. And so I would encourage that person to take a look. It's all about place-based, and it requires a team of applicants to work together on a community place-based strategy to advance essentially energy justice in that community. And so, and to advance a future that resonates with that place. And so I didn't want to miss the opportunity to put another plug in for the Communities Lead pilot, which just came out today, and which we hope will be a foundation for many more similar efforts that can just allow communities to have their dreams realized through energy planning. So I'm hoping that person will take a look.
Thank you. The next question is from Angela Chalk, and it's a question for Adriana. What advice or guidance would you provide to educate local elected officials to buy into community-driven energy resources? Also, for all panelists, how can community organizations participate in discussions at Department of Energy and other policy opportunities?
Great questions, and not a straightforward and easiest answer on the first part, Angela, because it's, it depends on your local elected officials. But I do think that they too, I would follow the same thing that we said earlier with interacting with all officials. It's about trying to reach them by providing them information. And, we can get deep into the weeds, right? Because I think the best way is to identify who you're talking to and really see where their experience and their interests lie and approach them with that. But also there's a different format that I've seen to be really effective, which is when communities get together and build that communal power, and then for the shared purpose can start to meet with local electeds and really educate them, because most electeds, local and frankly, even at the federal level, they have a lot coming at them at once. And I'm not, playing the smallest violin in the world, because I know that this is their job and they signed up for it. But at the same time, it really is a workload issue sometimes. And if they're not deeply interested in the issue, they're not going to seek it out on their own. So it really is about finding a way to work with those in your community who have that shared interest and reach out and don't stop reaching out, and use your local media as well, because that's a great way to also build community and grassroots attention for what you can provide. And they oftentimes, the media can really help to bring that to the forefront and to create that awareness and accountability among local electeds.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to respond to that one?
Yeah, I would like to jump in on that, because it touched on something that Adriana had mentioned earlier on, is that sense of know your power, take advantage of your power, and like really no one knows your community like you know your community. And that's both what the challenges are, but also what the potential solutions are, and what's likely to actually make a difference on whatever the particular issue is that you can bring to the local official and help them see how it fits into kind of a larger strategy for the area. So I just want to emphasize that power point, because I do think we tend to underestimate what we can accomplish both individually and collectively. And when it comes to finding solutions in your own community, you really got that. You've got everyone else beat on that point. So lean into it.
Thank you, Chair Mallory. This next one is from Nicole Avendano. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, Nicole. We are in a climate emergency. How do you balance the urgency in working to mitigate impacts with knowing that making restorative and just change requires a tremendous amount of time and patience?
Yeah, I mean, I guess really it's because it is an emergency, like we have no choice. You know what I mean? Like it's like one of those things where there's but only so much balance that can be sort of achieved on that. We kind of have to be doing it all and doing it hard right now, because we need to make progress in order to address the urgency of the climate situation. And we also need to make progress on these issues of injustice that have plagued us for so long. And so I just got to go for it. That's all.
And I'll just chime in a little bit here too, echoing something that Adriana said earlier about the justice component of this and how all of these pieces are interwoven. So I think I just want to be clear that when we move forward on climate, we're moving forward on justice. And any climate solution that does not have restorative elements will not be sustainable. It won't work. And so we have to ensure that the right folks are in the room making the decisions and are engaged, because we will then, if we don't, we'll create solutions that are ill-suited for places, right? And ill-suited for communities. And, you know, I'm sure any number of you could think about examples just from the last 2 weeks, you know, that you know, resonate in that regard. So we have to have folks at the table so that we can really ensure that all communities are protected as we mitigate climate change and as we adapt to the changes that are already underway. So it's all interwoven, and engaging communities and being restorative as you approach it does not slow it down, because ultimately it's going to leapfrog you ahead and past the solution that was inherently unsustainable. So I just wanted to make sure I put that out there.
Thank you for adding that on. Just looking at time, this is going to be our last question. And it looks like the team worked to consolidate this because we got variations of this question from a number of people. How can we connect and continue this important and groundbreaking work together?
I would say we could start by sharing this conversation. And again, building upon this power theme that Chair Mallory reinvigorated, talking to our friends and families about the importance of this and the relevance to every one of our lives is a really great place to start. Again, it does not seem to be that way, and yet it really is. That, and then building our circle from there. If we have media access, fantastic. If we are inclined to join school board meetings or have that level of leadership, let's participate there. But really take action. It just really builds from there. Artists have an amazing way of communicating on these themes. So there's just so much that we can do, and let's be working with the Biden and Harris administration, because this is just such an important moment. I can't underscore it enough. So bravo to you all who are carrying that water for us.
Thank you, ladies, so much for this conversation. And I want to let you know that we got nearly 30 questions. We don't have time to answer them all today, but I want to assure the audience that we will be working with the panelists to get answers to your questions. And we thank you for your engagement and participation, and I'll give it back to Dion.
I needed to unmute there. Well, thank you very much, Allison. And thank you to all of our remarkable trio of panelists, each and every one of you, for being part of today's event. I also want to thank the Institute's staff who are responsible for coordinating this event and our future Climate Equity in Action series events. And lastly, I want to thank everyone who's joining us by our Zoom link or live streaming today from various social media outlets. Thank you all for joining us today for the first in our Climate Equity in Action series. We've learned a lot today from our panelists on the ways the Biden-Harris administration is establishing policy and investments that are going to move our agenda forward. And we're really glad to have learned what we learned from you today about the policy and investments that are going to support racial equity and environmental, climate, and energy justice for communities. If you would like to support the work of the Institute for Sustainable Communities, and you are able, please consider supporting us and the community-led and locally led leaders we support by visiting sustain.org/donate, and you can find this link in the chat. We invite you to sign up for the Institute's newsletter by visiting our homepage to hear about all of the events in the series and the great work that we're doing. In closing, this event is recorded and will be shared with all registered participants, including answers to questions that remain unanswered due to time. Please join us for the next event in the series, where we will add to our dialogue about United States policy and administration with a conversation about equitable climate change solutions in the 6 countries where we're working in Asia. Again, our thanks for joining us. We look forward to you joining us in the future.